Hi everyone. My name is Farzaneh Haghighi. I'm a senior lecturer in architecture at the University of Auckland in New Zealand. Thanks for joining us for the second day. As you know, today is our second episode of this book launch, and we are going to have two more days. Today's topic is dissidence and urban commons. Tomorrow we will have our episode 3, Ecologies of Climate, Ethics and Postcolonialism. And the last day, episode 4, we will discuss spatial practices in futures to come. As Nikolina mentioned, we welcome questions, comments from the audience. We want to thank Professor Stephen Walker for chairing and moderating today's session. So without further ado, I hand it over to Stephen.
Thanks very much. Morning, everybody, or evening, or lunchtime, wherever you are in the world. I'm Stephen Walker from the University of Manchester in the UK. And it falls to me to give a very quick summary to the discussion that we had yesterday, because it leads into the kind of conversation, hopefully, that will develop today. But just before I start, I just wanted to, again, thank and congratulate Farzaneh and Nikolina for not only organising these episodes, but for pulling together this colossal project, which is this 2-volume Routledge Handbook, which you've all been involved with in different ways. I think it's a phenomenal achievement, and so very modest. But I think we should also be mindful that this is a sort of celebratory series of events as well. So congratulations to you both, and thanks to everyone who's contributed in various different ways. I want to sort of take a step back and recall some of the conversation that took place yesterday. The topic yesterday was different, looking at architecture and violence, in particular in the age of mediated spectacle. So through the discussion with the panel, there was a kind of reminder or an overview of many different kinds of violence that architecture and urban space either contribute to or are touched by or involved in, from direct physical action on citizens through to kind of less visible roles of violence that that are played. Also reminders of ecological violence, social violence, economic, cultural violences that are kind of run through architectural and urban space. Also, there was a longer conversation around violences involved in and produced by representation, and image and spectacle. Images becoming in their own way a site or a space for violence to be perpetuated or to be transmitted, and the importance of recognizing images or spectacle space as a locus where architectures and architects might be operating. We also talked quite a bit about invisible violences or violences to come or not yet violences, particularly as these were being designed into gentrification schemes where inequalities were kind of implicit in the way that cities were set to be developed. And then perhaps lastly, as a handoff to today's discussion, we're also talking about the kind of reaffirmation of, or becoming more hopeful, I would put it, looking at the reaffirmation of values that could come through dissidence, and also looking to identify and discuss increasing resistance in times of rising global tensions. So in some ways, the conversation yesterday grew out of volume 1 of the handbook, which was more of a like an overview of violence and an architectural space. I think the ambition of Farzaneh and Nikolina is for today to be a bit more hopeful, a bit more prospective, and to touch on and pick up some of the themes that are set out more explicitly in volume 2. So looking to open up a conversation around dissidence, a variety of different modes of dissidence, very specific examples, and also a discussion around the commons commoning or the role that the commons might play in a more hopeful future.
Yeah, hello everyone. Thanks for joining us today. Again, congratulations to Nikolina and Farzaneh. I'm an associate professor at the University of Sydney and had the honor to write the conclusion for the second gigantic volume. So looking very forward to the conversation today.
Hello. Thank you everyone for making me part of this. I'm an associate professor at Jindal School of Art and Architecture in Sonipat, which is the outskirts of Delhi. And I contributed with my co-authors in the volume 1. Our chapter was called Whose Vision Which City?
Yeah, hello everyone. My name is Katerina Antonopoulou. I'm a lecturer in architectural design from the University of Liverpool. My chapter appears on the first volume.
Hi everyone, Tal Kaminer. I'm at the Welsh School of Architecture, and that's at Cardiff University. So looking forward. Thanks.
Stavros, Pipe, I'm very jealous of you being able to sit there and smoke.
For me, Zoom meetings are the most appropriate setting. I'm just chilling back and enjoying. So yeah, you meant me, Stavros, right? Not the other Stavros.
My sorry, I just realized we have two now.
Yeah, because you said the pipe, that's how I realized. Yeah, I'm Stavros from the Architecture Theory and Philosophy here in TU Delft. And with my colleague Gerhard Brown from Hong Kong, we contributed on the second volume on urban commons.
Nice to see you. My name is Sabina. I'm a senior lecturer in fashion design at the School of Jewelry and Textiles in Birmingham City University, UK.
Hello, I'm Pablo Sendra. I'm an associate professor in planning and urban design at the Bartlett School of Planning, UCL, here in London. And I contributed to the second volume with my colleague Daniel Fitzpatrick.
Hi, I'm Steve Liu. I'm Professor of Design at the School of Art and Design at the University of New South Wales in Sydney. And I contributed to the second volume with a very weirdly titled essay on the butcher.
Hello, good morning. Sorry for being a bit late, but I had problems with the connection. I'm emeritus professor actually of architectural design and theory in the School of Architecture in Athens, National Technical University of Athens. And I have contributed to the second volume on the topic of participation and commons.
Thank you all. Right, we'll just hopefully start a conversation. Farzaneh and Nikolina circulated a couple of questions just to warm you up. So if I could pose the first one, it's really opening up a discussion around how can architects or spatial practitioners reclaim agency. So very wide potential opening based on either the chapter that you wrote or the kind of practice that you're involved with. I wondered if anyone wants to start or offer some kind of response to that, and then we can begin to weave in other conversations, other takes and geographies.
So I think before we start talking about the agency and how we can reclaim that, I think the first step, at least in the work I do and the way I teach also, is to confront the discipline's complicity in neoliberal restructuring of this world, structuring the world, but also we have to examine the architects and the discipline's role in colonialism, past, present, ongoing, segregation, oppression, inequality, ecological harm, social harm, all of these. So once we do that, probably one of the ways is to engage in critical practice and also political and spatial dissent. And this is also coming from reading some of the chapters of this book. Through pedagogy, I would say we have to start questioning, history of architecture. How is it written? Who has written it? What is being taught? Who is, included in it, who is invisibilized, who's erased and relegated to the margins, but also like even the conversation that's going on, what is being taught in schools. If we have to engage in critical practice, we have to start with the question of accountability as professionals. And when I talk about accountability, I'm thinking something in the lines of how medical professionals actually can lose their license. I think it's time for us to talk about those. We have to look at how our work, even how what we teach and the practices that we're doing, it contributes to social, ecological harm, economic harm. Some of the simple ways also could be, even if, acts of refusal also there's already a lot of talk about that. Even if we don't want to go to that extreme of acts of refusal of architecture, we could spark debates. We should start with critique, engaging with community, engaging with the neighborhood. And I think the alternative can actually start coming from there. I'm tempted to say we need to engage with more bottom-up and activist-oriented practices. But there is also the question of accountability of the university. And when I'm talking about accountability of the profession and university, I'm not saying that these are separate. So, universities and teachers and professionals, we have to lead this. We have to facilitate collaborative work, citizen participation. And also, like when we talk about these words like decolonial, degrowth, allyship, what does it really mean? What does it mean being in allyship with marginalized communities, talking about urban commons? And maybe the last thing I would say is also we should start auditing existing structures, buildings, and we do it through critique in our classrooms, but maybe we should also bring it back to the profession.
I may add something if
Thank you,
it's possible.
Stavros.
Yes, I agree with what she's describing as the areas of possible intervention of architects and also educators in architecture. Maybe I would add that we need to also share knowledges that we have acquired through the practice or through our experiences by working together with movements or urban struggles in general. And this sharing of knowledge is part of commoning architecture. It's also a very crucial element in our contribution. And of course, this sharing of knowledge or expertise, I think, should be also connected to the idea that we are not the sole owners of this kind of knowledge. This knowledge has been developed not only in universities, but also in the life of people in different cities. So maybe we can become some kind of catalysts in connecting various areas of knowledge that have to do with the production of space, and thus create possible networks of exchanges rather than become, let's say, the point of reference or the most important part of a knowledge structure. I think we need to be more humble and learn from people and transmit this knowledge as much as we can in areas in which this knowledge becomes part of life and not simply, analytical procedures or theoretical, let's say, exercises.
I do agree with Stavros in terms of understanding the knowledges that we actually have within the disciplines and maybe within institutions. But also my question is, what would be the knowledge of the commons? And if we start to put that category of knowledge in place of in next to agency, we would have to say that the knowledge of the commons is certainly not common because it will rely upon a kind of diversity of viewpoints, right? And if we try and universalize common knowledge, what will tend to happen is that we will start to rely upon particular categories of thought and ways of thinking, and therefore we'll get into all kinds of biases, which Ishita's kind of talking about. And especially when the knowledges that we think we have, and the capacities of things that we can do, if we know those, we should then also acknowledge that what we have done so far, and when I say we, I'm talking about, of course, I'm generalizing, but I'm talking about, institutions and particular epistemologies which are which have the power to kind of change sort of viewpoints and behaviors. We just have to see what has been done with that knowledge and realize that our accountability, we need to be accountable for the disasters and the damages that we have. So agency of common knowledge is quite a paradoxical thing. On one hand, we can't universalize that knowledge, but on the other hand, how do we then identify agency when we don't yet know, what a building can do and what an architect or a university can do?
Can I go?
Yeah, go for it. Yeah, this is good.
I wanted to connect some of the things that were mentioned by the three panelists already to maybe some of the examples that appear on the book chapter that we wrote, because I think it relates to some of these discussions. So we wrote a book chapter around the role of the architects that they have in developing people's plans in collaboration with communities, particularly communities resisting the demolition of their homes, which I think it linked with movements and share and exchange knowledge with them. And I think for me, the book does a review on how this happened mainly in the 60s and the 80s, and then it compares to how it has happened more recently in social movements. And interestingly, at the time that we were developing this chapter, we were also partnering with two different community organizations across London on helping them developing their people's plan and contest the demolition of their homes. So we saw, in a way, also the role of architecture as a way of enhancing the agency that already exists within the existing social movement. So in a way, for us, it was quite key that these resident-led campaigns to defend their homes already existed in the area, and that we appeared as a tool, as an ally, to support them in developing a community vision and to put words, images, and urban design proposals and social infrastructure proposals, and that went with the urban design proposals to their ideas. And I think something that was quite interesting, particularly when the residents presented with our help to the local authority, and that led also to changes in decision making in the local authority, was for the residents to point out what actually they wanted, and having a collective vision. And that relates to what Stephen was just saying about what is that of the common. And I remember when we were discussing with the residents, we were co-producing that people's plan, something that came quite clear is how can we develop a vision that in a way unites everyone. So it didn't arrive to a certain level of details that may create divergent opinions on that, but there were a lot of residents living there that had a collective idea of the type of neighborhood they wanted. So it was kind of like, how do we develop that through this process? And just in connecting to pedagogy, this is something that we've been trying to develop as part of in our planning school, as in one of the modules that we teach, and we involved also students on the co-production of that people's plan, which I thought it was also through the work in the module, which I think is quite important also for developing, in this case, urban designers and urban planners of the future. So I'm going to stop here because I'm going too long, but I just wanted to maybe bring a few examples.
Thanks very much. I just wonder if I can invite Tal to come in on this point. And Tal, I know you wrote on housing, and especially the differences between a kind of privatized approach to housing compared to a kind of collective approach to housing for the handbook, but also have a much wider expertise. So this idea of kind of residents defending their own homes, is there something that you could speak to or expand in this context.
Hi, everyone. I think, just to add a couple of things, which I think we'll probably all agree with, but maybe I'm wrong. Maybe these things are less evident than I think. Regarding the question of agency of architects and their ability to make a difference, let's say, I think one of the key issues is, first of all, not working within the confines of a normal architecture office, expanding or questioning the brief or doing other things, right? I mean, we all know a lot of examples of that. So, going beyond, let's say, the normal way of architecture as a way of actually having agency. And that, of course, raises questions regarding what about the everyday architecture office, right? That would be the Jeremy Till question. So, you can always have avant-garde or vanguard firms, individuals doing things differently. But what about the everyday firm? How to change how they work, which is a big question I have no answer to, but it's a very relevant one. The second issue, I think, is again, the kind of alliances architects build outside of architecture, right? That you are not just working as an architect, but working across different fields, whether it's we heard a lot about communities, but also about the politicians involved, right? Local politicians, local planners. As by alliance, I mean working with the same ideas in mind, with the same destination, right? The same ambition. So that is a kind of shared alliance where you work together using different expertise, different bases of power, if you like, to try and change things. So these are, for me, two fundamental issues regarding agency, and they go against this kind of idea of agency that we know from elsewhere, right? The agency not as the way of making a difference in the world, but the idea of the autonomy and freedom of the artist or of the architect, where usually the more we have freedom, the less we have actually impact or agency, right? This kind of artists can say whatever they want because nobody cares what they say, right? These kind of things. So working against that, this idea of working, losing some of our freedom by joining forces, working with others. But I want to throw something else on the table, the question of pedagogy, because we have here on the panel some people who have worked a lot with that, and I'm curious to hear their opinion, because one of the difficulties I've noticed in academia is a kind of long-term connection when you are working with a community. We've got a lot of projects where you go in with students to a neighborhood and then you go out. I've gone to areas, let's say in Edinburgh, impoverished areas like Craigmillar, and then I discover the geographers are there too, having meetings with the same people. We're talking about an overstretched voluntary sector, right? And everybody from the geographers to me and my group are trying to meet the same people, and a kind of more burden it puts on these neighborhoods compared to what we can actually give them at the end, what we can give in short-term modules or courses is pretty limited. And I must say I had difficulties continuing with that and also devising a way where I can see how these neighborhoods actually benefit more than they actually did, which was pretty limited. So I'm quite curious to hear what others have done and how to be able, in the context of academia, have also these long-term relationships where everything is packaged into short terms. Thanks.
May I just say something regarding agency before we jump to pedagogies? Because I have a very big problem with the term, and I will not be able to live with myself unless I express it. Because I find it a best case scenario a counterproductive, not to say obstructive term. It implies an inherent supposed volition of a supposed subject. So it works with a very privatized manner in understanding politics. And I think it should be get done with this approach to politics that confuses them with agency. Politics, originally, even from the term, has to do, I mean, with the polis, I mean, with the urban, it has to do with how do you deal with complexity or how do you deal with relationality. It's not about dealing with yourself and with your supposed powers. It's about dealing with relations. And I think that would be a first fundamental step in order to acknowledge that eventually whatever we might be speaking about, it should be about processes of estrangement. So how do we become strangers to ourselves, rather than how we affirm our likings and our tendencies. So I had to say that before anything else on pedagogy.
Yeah, I completely agree, Stavros. I think this term agency has its presupposition that we somehow know who is going to be agential, who is going to have the power to actually make change. And usually the definitions of that would be a particular group of people, usually, men in kind of Western societies, having both monetary as well as kind of influence in terms of changing behavior. So, the idea that agency might come from the commons is something that is quite difficult to sort of deal with. And so going into a place and a community and somehow saying we're going to give them agency, we're going to give them, have their say in justice for their own. These communities have their own knowledge, and these knowledges are, wide and varied, and they know how they have the know-how of moving and working with the restrictions that they have. And for us, for people to come in and say, look, we're going to increase your agency, to be able to kind of resist, big power structures. I think if architects think that architecture as a kind of material and political practice can do that, I think we're really quite misled. I don't think it's that powerful in that way. I have a feeling from kind of my point of view is if architecture can allow communities or clients to be able to have future hope, future questions, and this hope doesn't come from solutions. It comes from the possibility and the privilege of being able to ask questions about their future. And this is a completely different way of kind of looking at agency, and really to take a lot of focus and interest in what it is to comment, rather than knowing what common knowledge is.
I'll talk about what I'm doing right now through my very small practice. Small in the sense, I don't really practice as an architect, but I do work with the communities and I teach. My PhD had looked at the architecture and urban design of informal settlements. And I think one of the things that I'm also trying to do is start a conversation about which is the dominant form of urban design in our age, in our era. And I'm from Mumbai, but right now I teach in Delhi. 60 to 70% of the population actually live in informal settlements. And one of the things is they are the dominant urban designers of Mumbai. And we don't really talk about them as architects or urban designers, but we talk about them as spaces which require experts to come in and transform them. So, which is where my interest in, I think I was also quite disappointed with the field of architecture, disappointed with my choice of this field and everything. But I'm slowly finding a way to come back and live with the choices I've made. So coming back to all of the points that everybody's making, I think every context has to deal with their own, situated problems of what architecture has done and architecture is doing. Right now in India, the large-scale demolition of informal settlements, that has been our biggest challenge. The discussions we were having in the 50s and 60s have come back, that slums are spaces of poverty, pollution, encroachment, and everything. So while everywhere else, and I see my colleagues actually talking about so many different things, we are going back to saying, no, if you demolish them, they will just go and settle somewhere else. You're just like increasing more problems. there is a dearth of housing. So how do you deal with that? So, I mean, I'm just like, so in India, we are still doing the same things we were doing in the 50s and 60s, what I've been reading. So it's kind of challenging there, sad there. I don't know if I'm even answering any of the questions, but going back to the question of agency, and I think that was so informative also, how you look at agency. And also the question about that, we really, we don't give people agency. And I think also sometimes when we think of ourselves as people who are doing so much, we have so much power, I think that that's a good point to start with. But what has also happened when I teach my students these things, they're really disappointed too. And I think somewhere I would need your help, but how do you go and teach your students not to be disappointed with the field? Because there is this depression that, okay, it seems all doom, whatever you're telling us. Whereas then the question of agency, how do we like teach the new generation? Like, what do we tell them?
So is that a challenge because of their expectations? Is it a challenge because they are hoping to bring about a more visible, or what they would imagine to be more visible change? Is it a lack of patience because they needed, these processes take much longer? It's like Tal's observation about kind of live projects where inevitably as academics we have a limited amount of time that might be spent with the community, and then the students are on to a different project. So is there a challenge of timescale within education?
Just to briefly intervene, I think what Ashita was saying, and Stephen, what you were picking up on, quite nicely weaves into a question that we've been asked from the audience. And it's about the concerns about the discipline's appeal within the universities and the kind of the enrollments, which is significantly declining, at least in UK and Australia. So basically, it's worldwide enrollments in architecture degrees have significantly declined, raising concerns about the discipline's appeal within universities. This trend is particularly evident in the UK, Australia, where universities increasingly operate as mechanisms for capital generation. If this pattern continues, how will critical arguments and discussions find a place within these schools' curricula? What does the future hold for our architecture schools and departments? And in a way that picks up on Wishita was saying, that the students are kind of somewhat disappointed by the information that we teach, because on one hand it is kind of teaching, it's showing doom and gloom, but at the same time, how can we give them the tools to address with some of the pressing problems and challenges?
I can attempt to try and answer that question, seeing that when I teach at UNSW, my cohort of students in the Masters of Design, and this is post-bachelor's Masters of Design or MA in Design, and these my class is about 90% international students, and when I mean international, most of them are from China, and the rest would be from India, and very few kind of local students. So interestingly, the way in which I do it, basically I need to teach politics on the first day, and this politics is the politics of self. We need to actually get students to understand their positionality in the world, and to say that you might have come with expectations of learning about how to design and how to kind of make change and make the world a better place. But in many ways, you come not as an empty book. You come, with knowledges that you've gained from your undergraduate degree, or your life experience and your work practice, and you've also gained a lot of inherited cultural knowledge in your positionality as a particular race in a particular country, and politics. And so we are all political beings, and to actually get students to recognize that really they don't, firstly, and I'm talking here about master students, and they're not undergraduate students. So we don't need to tell them anymore, but they have enough, understanding of architecture and design and art to be able to start to kind of reflect on reconfiguring, their knowledge of themselves and what they know, and to put that in a much wider global, context that is, not, and we give them basically the potentiality to reconfigure sort of thinking and practice. And I think that's what, the architecture and design is probably very good for going into the future. Short of saying, I prefer not to design, I prefer not to do architecture, which is, sometimes the position I take. But in some ways, it is to say, okay, let's use the power of design and architecture to undo itself, to look at what has been designed and what has been built, and to then learn from the commons. And we're talking here about the ingenuity of particular people in informal settlements, and the fact that they do with so little, right? And yet they make things work. And if we demolish, informal settlements, what we end up doing would be creating an ecological catastrophe, because suddenly everything has to be new again. And the kind of minutiae of know-how of how to do with very little just goes out the window, right? And then we just end up with doubling the problem. So I think, being able to get students to understand that they are political animals to start with, and that we're not about to kind of, give them the knowledge, which will then give them agency, because the agencies are already kind of within them, is for us to help them recognize what they are and to guide them in ways of actually imparting that agency in ways, that are sustainable and that are ethical.
I just wanted to add on this. I mean, I come from fashion design, so my perspective on architecture is slightly different, but I think there are so many overlaps in terms of the pedagogical approaches. And to me, a lot of teaching undergraduate, maybe less MA level, is about ensuring that students become comfortable with uncertainties and that they become comfortable with experiencing doubt, for example, in their work, and to maybe shift around how we can utilize both uncertainty and doubt as a driver to become curious about their position in the world and how they can utilize this to look at their projects or processes in maybe a more open-minded way, rather than, focusing on a final outcome, focusing on the grades, focusing on, I don't know, having the acknowledgement, but really using doubt and uncertainty as a means to experience themselves within a process of learning about a certain, I don't know, form in architecture or fashion design or design in general. So I think we need to maybe move away from trying to offer students the certainty of, this is fashion design in my case, this is how you design a product, but to kind of move towards something that we don't know, because we don't know. And I think we shouldn't know. It should be kept quite open, I think, to tackle the societal and environmental issues that we're facing.
I'd like to follow up on that. Someone mentioned earlier about expanding the brief, and I think it's really important that we raise, basically we begin to raise bigger and broader questions about the world, so beyond the site, beyond the project, beyond the city, even to really address the world. But I would like to also return to Tal's question, because it's a really important one. Unfortunately, I don't have a very clear answer. I completely agree. It's impossible to pack these conditions into taught modules or into studios. The timings are very, very different, and sometimes they become funny simulations of the real thing. So for me, it's more important that with students we develop we take positions and we develop tools for them to take positions within things, and that we develop studios that go against abstraction and towards very specific site situations and beyond the frame of the picture that sometimes they take themselves, so they can be in the place and still not be able to read or understand the place appropriately to respond. Yesterday we talked a lot about mediated representation as well, and I think this is the thing. So it's about developing the tools for everyone to be able to take a position and unpacking spaces and understanding histories, material conditions, perspectives, ecologies, and the list can go forever.
Yes, if I may add to all that is being said on that. First of all, I would kind of disagree with the idea of teaching others politics. I mean, they should discover themselves what politics is for them, but perhaps encouraging them to confront their role and their possible agency through certain, let's say, hints or suggestions that would expose them to questions. So to discover their political potentialities through ways that make them think again about what they consider as certain or given. For example, when I teach housing, I say to them, please let us all agree that houses are not an agglomeration of rooms. What if we take this out of the question, what else can we say about a house? What is a house if it's not an agglomeration of containers? So the first approach they have is yes, if I want to design a house, I must, connect a living room with a bedroom and so on and so forth. But if there are no names for those spaces, if there are no specific, let's say, informations about what those spaces are made of, then can we think of houses or housing areas as a complex set of relations? So if these are relations, what makes them? What creates those relations? What kind of distinguishes certain relations from others? So it somehow is one of the ways that I try to introduce the idea that the moment you decide, you participate in a set of relations, and then you affect those relations. So this is perhaps more important than addressing names or reproduce what you consider as essential elements of a certain problem. So this is a form of introducing the politics of space, if I may say so. Introducing the idea that talking about space is already exposing yourself to the political dimensions of space.
And situating yourself within that relationship rather than studying it from the outside.
Yes, I think so. And this idea of exposure, danger perhaps, not being able to reproduce what you already feel is evident or obvious or certain, is a kind of shock that creates questions about your role or your agency, if you want. Unless you doubt, you cannot kind of discover yourself as a student or as a future architect or as a future activist. You cannot discover politics, and nobody can, I think, teach you that. You can only be exposed to conditions that show you that it exists and possibly direct you to some kind of role.
Thank you very much. We've got time for Pablo, who's had his hand up for a few minutes, and then I'd like to pass it back to Farzaneh and Nikolina for a final reflection. Pablo.
Yeah, thank you. Just very briefly, and mine applies a bit more to urban planning, which is what I teach rather than architecture, although I did study architecture many years ago. I think for me, something that is very important when teaching my students is the teaching the ethics of the profession, which is something that I think sometimes might be overseen. What is in a way our responsibility as urban planners towards society for creating better and more equitable cities. I think that's something that we try to convey through our teaching. And I do think it's very important to have for students to have that direct experience and the way. But I do understand the issue that some of the panelists have mentioned on the difference in timing between community of a course that sometimes does not match quite well, which is an issue that I think some of us have faced in many occasions. But at the same time, I see that there's a lot of, I mean, particularly with my activist hat in London and working a lot with community organizations, I see a lot of community organizations that do have a lot of need for planning expertise in their campaigns, in I don't know, supporting them contesting a particular scheme or proposing a community-led scheme. And it's in our role as educators to see how through both our research and on continuous engagement with the reality, we can make room for our students to participate in that and have that direct experience. It's not easy, and it's always kind of like a bit of a struggle, but I think it's definitely a way to expose the students to the reality and also the ethical responsibilities of an urban planner.
Yeah, perhaps to have a final response, and particularly in the context of your initial ambitions for the handbook and for the way it has been set up with this sort of prospective agenda. I wonder how well the discussion lines up with what you've done. Big question.
We wouldn't expect anything less from you, Stephen. So thank you so much. I think in terms of this handbook, and I'll try to be short, even though I'm not promising. The idea is almost to take it as just a toolbox of ideas and projects, rather for it to be kind of taken also at a kind of as the ultimate truth. And there are the approaches and the perspectives have been so different, and it's been lovely to see such kind of slightly kind of positions from the panel today that are kind of coming from different ends, and for a bit of a kind of discursive discussion to arise. So the handbook, it's a teaching tool that is a toolbox of ideas rather than a totality or anything. And if anything, it's meant to kind of stir more debate and generate more friction in pedagogy and in academia. We are very well aware, picking up on the question that someone from the audience had in terms of that universities are becoming, or they already are, neoliberal companies, and there are certain restrictions that are imposed upon all of us. So it becomes a question: how do we teach material and kind of guide and in some way inspire the future generations of architects, urban planners, or spatial practitioners in a way that, on one hand, we constantly keep us, in a way, as Stavros used the word, keep us changing ourselves. I think it's a tough challenge. I mean, I'm in the UK, and universities, especially in the Southwest, there are quite a few cuts in terms of resources. So how do we teach, and how do we kind of address all of these issues? It is to be seen, but all I would say, in a way, that Stephen Liu mentioned that he teaches a postgraduate audience, and one of his approaches is that students do have their own biography and a position and a stance, and he teaches at postgraduate level. I think that is something that should be brought in right from at undergraduate level, and it's a question of, from year one, it's a way of how do we negotiate that we teach them some of the pragmatic skills of how to kind of communicate their ideas, but also to recognize and build the student lives into the brief, and that in itself will kind of make them question and also position themselves in terms of what their kind of political positioning is. And on this note, I will pass it on to Farzaneh.
Okay, I'll be short. So one of the, it reminded me of one of the aims of this project that we embarked on was to explore the relevance of architecture and urbanism in our contemporary world, facing with the challenges that we are facing today. So I think for me personally, today's conversation was insightful in a way that it touched on the idea of pedagogy and education. Personally, I found this concept of exposing the student to the unknown, to the challenges, and making them feel uncomfortable that we don't know the answers, but these are the challenges, and these are the places where architecture and urban can intervene and can become part of the conversation, not necessarily making or proposing the solutions, but becoming part of the conversation. And I think back to the question that was raised here, that the appeal of architecture and urban studies being declining is, I think, could be a reflection of the architecture and urbanism falling outside of this conversation. And I think bringing this handbook was to highlight that they should have a seat around those tables where there's a conversation around the housing, as Toll mentioned, geographers are there. So architects should be at that table too. Yeah, so that's from me. And with that note, actually, I wanted to refer to our Q&A from one of our audience who posted a comment. I think it's more of a comment than a question. I was wondering if they would like to join us and speak to their comment. So what I can see from this is after working in academia, they have moved to early childhood education and see the importance of the environment as a third teacher, which is fundamental issue during the life of everyday experiences and how it can shape democratic citizens. Okay. And from that note, one thing that I come to, one point is perhaps connecting it to the first comment in the Q&A. Perhaps it would be the opportunity for us to rethink what is this neoliberal university is losing, is missing, and what can we bring back to it and revitalize it. Perhaps one way would be to look at early childhood centers, as this is in the comment of this one of our attendees. No, just thank you, everyone, and hope you have a beautiful rest of your day or night, wherever you are.
All right, thank you.
Very much.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah, cheerio.
Bye.
Bye.